10, 20 years ago, maybe even 30, I would love to have had the chance to walk up to somebody, a warden or a policymaker, and say, how do you feel about creating a punitive system that makes people worse off than they were when they went in? How's that sound? That's pretty reasonable, right?
Great
They would
idea,
probably,
huh?
they'd be like, no, that sounds terrible. I'm like, well, newsflash, you're about to do the next 30 years making that a thing.
Right.
I'm going to bring it down a level because I want to stick to the point and purpose of the advocacy work. And we already know, we've talked about like it's, the right thing to do. We want to consider people's human nature and keep to this promise as a country that we've made to allow people to, define themselves and rebuild themselves and have a second chance and learn. What about the advocacy work that you're doing specifically with the podcast, the people you meet and interview? What are you trying to contribute to at this moment in time with your work?
I think with maybe the largest thing is restoring hope. To give people the idea that somebody out here cares, that someone cares enough to devote an hour a week or 6 hours a month, whatever it is, to take the time to try to provide something to give them hope. So I like to bring in people that have been affected by the system, especially if it's somebody who's done 20 years and they come out, and I love to talk to them and have them share their success stories to say, and they're honest. They say how hard it is, but they just tell people you have to have the resiliency and you have to believe in yourself. And if you know who you are inside, who you truly are, you just keep putting your best foot forward and do the best you can. And I like the idea that I'm involved with several groups that work with reentry, and they're actually doing work in setting up resources for across the country. It's not just here in Maine. So people will have one place they can go and get resources when they come out of prison.
You made me think about resilience and hope inside prison. How? One of my favorite things that I have discovered, especially through podcasts from other prison facilities, is the will and nature of certain prisons, especially people on death row, prisoners who go about learning about themselves, whether it's spiritually or mentally or psychologically. They go to the library to get books. They ask for materials and they're learning. They have cellmates and they're taking in that wisdom. They mentally reconstruct who they are. And a lot of the times it is for the better. Like they go in, somehow they have a path that is set up, call it luck or ingenuity, where they are becoming a better person by their own hand, even in a system that tells them you are crap, you are bad, and it's that script every day. Can you talk about a little about the culture of prisons as you've witnessed it and how people build that resilience and hope despite being treated less than human?
I think outside resources have a lot to do with it. I think it's really hard to keep faith, if for lack of a better word, when you don't have any distraction at all. Being involved with people on the outside world is a distraction, and a good distraction. So now I don't know where I wanted to go with that. I'm going to change up what I'm going to say here.
Okay.
Reading. Number one thing I think that I've encouraged all along is reading. Most people in prison, I shouldn't say most, 1/3 of people in prison can only read at a 6th grade level. So I tell people read comic books, read cartoons, read kids' books. If you have children, best thing to practice reading is children's books. You can read them on the phone to your child, you know? So reading, because if you can read, you can learn anything in this world. Nothing and no one can stop you. Your brain is your own. You own it. You might be living in a state-run facility, but your mind is still your own. And they cannot take that from you.
Oh, yes. Yes. It is
So,
autonomy and the responsibility for your autonomy. Absolutely. And
through
education.
reading, right. So, through
Hmm.
reading, I start recommending some books that I have been told by other people that I've worked with throughout the years, books that made big impressions with them. And one of them was The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which is kind of a fantasy book, but it's one of those books that just opens someone's thought. Um, I think the book that I've bought the most for people in prison was a book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Anger, Cooling the Flames of Anger. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about this book. I was in college. I was known to have kind of a short fuse. I got very frustrated with school, and people often heard me spitting and sputting off in a corner somewhere by myself. So I had a friend of mine, and he was very quiet and shy. And he came to school one day and he had a book. And he says, I have something I want to give you, but I'm afraid to give it to you. And I said, why? And he says, well, I don't want to make you mad. So he hands me this book, and it was Thich Nhat Hanh's Cooling the Flame of Anger. He said, I'm giving you this because I care about you, and you have a problem with anger. One of the best things anyone ever gave me because it changed my life. So I've found that that is a book that is fairly simple to read. Thich Nhat Hanh has also done a couple of little books. It's called Be Free Where You Are, little tiny book. And this is about having freedom no matter where you are. And this was written for people in prison. And it's tiny, tiny little book, 69 pages long. But it's a beautiful book for anyone to have who's in prison because it makes them really look at the good that's inside of them. We all have good inside of us. We just forget about it sometimes. And being in prison's a hard place to be able to remember that. So when you talk to people about their moms and they start getting excited and, oh, my mom's such a beautiful woman and she cooked the best food, and you can hear the goodness inside of them in their voice. So, that's one thing that we have to reinforce that with people. We have to reinforce the good that's happening in there. It seems like nothing good happens in prison, but it does. Hospice in prison is remarkable. The men who sit with the other men and the women who sit with the women as they're ending, their life is coming to end. And they sit there with them 24 hours a day. They hold their hands and they wipe their face. That's what we need to see inside of what's going on in the prisons. We need to see that they're human beings, and we need to start treating them like human beings. That's what, when I write, I try to write back every person who writes me. I have 8 letters behind me right now that need to be answered, but even if it's just a quick note to say, thank you for writing me. I heard you. I recognize you. I know you're there. And then they say, I think you're talking to me. Your message was for me. And of course, it was not for one person. But to be able to hear that and know that just by being kind, that's really how I look at my podcast. It's an act of kindness. And I just want people to know that, if you're in prison, it doesn't mean that you're no good. If those people who are religious, there used to be a saying back in the 70s, and it was, God makes no junk. You
Mhm.
know, if we're all created in his image, and I'm not a religious person, I'm a spiritual person, but if we were all created in his image, that includes all those people that are in prison.
The system itself, the way we function as human beings, it's a level of codependency we can't quite grasp, and yet it is so important that we understand that people come out of prison systems, and when they are abused, mistreated, told that they're, just they're inhuman, or what they've done is the only definition of who they are. Then they come back into your neighborhood and they disrupt something, and you want to say like and judge them for the disruption that was amplified by what you're paying for the treatment.
Exactly.
No, that doesn't, I don't think anybody out there would agree with that. My question is, how do we get people on board? And I mean on board on the spectrum. Like, I'm not saying everyone's got to go after they listen to this podcast and like become a volunteer working in the prison system, but the interest to be there. And I feel like you're going to say education, but what is your experience in getting the experience people can't have being inside the system to them? How do we make witnesses of the problem?
That's a really good question. I think the only way to get through, and I don't want to say people with money, but the only way you are going to get through to them is through their pocketbooks and tell them how much money they're saving. Because they don't
Right.
really, I don't want to say they don't care about the people. I think that people have this thought that anyone in prison is a horrible person.
Hmm.
Horrible. They've just got to be the worst people ever if they're in prison. They don't think that it was a second. I mean, how long does it take to pull a trigger of a gun? 1 second. 1 second of someone's life changes it forever.
Hmm.
And not just their lives, their community's lives, because the community is affected by violence, their families, their children, their, oh my God, a mom that has to see her teenage child go to prison. What does
You're
that
gonna make me
do?
cry again. Right.
Well,
And then
this
there's
is
arrested development, and then there's
right. So this is where some, like when we talk about human services, I think that one thing that is really people, I don't want to say they don't care. I think it's a very hard topic to bring up. But I
right.
think anyone going to get help from any social services need to be asked, has your life been affected by incarceration? Because that adds another whole entire level to the family dynamics and children and problems children have in school. I mean, they're constantly worried about kids with ADHD. Do they say, does the kid have a parent who's in prison? 1.4 million children, which probably half of them may end up involved with foster care. And it increases their chances by 50% of going to prison themselves.
Right, because these cyclical things, they start to
Right.
kind of like wind together. Like there's a connection, and they're not good ones. There's connection
No.
between the education pipeline and also the foster care system. It's probably best we all work together to really understand and ask that kind of question. Like, has anybody in your family have you been impacted by? And I know that's hard. I know there's no matter what kind of social service you're looking for, I'm sure, I know there is shame and there is embarrassment or there is
Right.
a sense of like isolation or weakness. There are feelings people don't want to admit they have when it comes to admitting these kinds of things. They're homeless, they lost their job, they've been affected by the incarceration. I'm like almost convinced like if we're trying to help people and we need others that don't like haven't seen the problem and we're trying to get them through their pockets, I'm going to start a humane field tripping excursion where people that need to see what's going on and put them on a bus and take them in there and be like, this is what you're paying for. This is where they're burning your pockets.
Exactly.
This
Just
sucks,
what's
doesn't it?
needed.
Yeah, right. And I don't, I kind of say that half jokingly, and I don't mean to suggest that we should be extorting that like a haunted house or something.
No.
But people have to see to believe. And going back to your point, is like I don't believe people are naturally inclined to not like human beings or to make assumptions. Really, I think our biological brains are still stuck in like I got to see it to believe it. You ask anybody who's been impacted by incarceration, and now that they've experienced that experience has become bodily and mental and psychological. It's part of their reality. They're never going to turn back and still have the same opinion. So with those who've never been around it and have these opinions about the kind of people that are in, in prison, or how it should function, they're just ideas. They're just
Yeah.
ideas that either need to be interrupted by experience or paid well enough off to get rid of them, which sucks. But I understand the country that we live in.
Well, and the thing too is like if a police officer goes to prison, they usually won't go in the same state that they were working in because it's not safe.
Yeah, I don't know why I just thought of this. It's like in the Sherlock Holmes movie when he gets locked up with all the other prisoners, and they're like kind of they circle him. He's like, "Oh, this is not good," because he basically put all of them in there. We have talked about so much in less than an hour, and I still feel we haven't like barely touched the surface. But there is one thing when you talk about your book,
Okay.
Notes from a
Nope.
Peaceful Sociologist. Yep.
So I've always wanted to write a book, and I had started writing notes. And it started out that I was just kind of going to talk about how I got into the work. And not long after I started writing, I had a death. One of the people that I had worked with died. And then I got writing about them. And I just decided I was just going to write, just like if I was writing in a journal, but about the work I was doing. And one of the things that I found as I was writing, as I was losing one after another, I wanted to show the people that I knew, the people I knew, not the criminals, not the felons, not that piece of crap over there, not that drunk, that druggie. The human beings, the loving, caring, kind human beings that I got to know. Most of the people I wrote about in my book had done either a long bid, and I'm talking 20 years, or they did a long bid on an installment plan. So they would come out, be out for 5 months, be back in. They'd go in for 2 years, come home for 6 months, go back for 5 years. So that's what the installment plan of incarceration is. And it's
Hmm.
usually because they can't meet their probation or parole requirements. They just can't do it.
Yeah.
And that is because they weren't prepared to function back in the world. But anyways, so um, I wrote about Danny. And Danny I met when I was first doing the work. And Danny was a sweet, sweet person inside. But he struggled with alcoholism terribly. And it was what took his life in the end. But Danny was one that a lot of people wouldn't have taken the time to really get to know. And when he came out, he said he was willing to go to treatment. He came right straight from prison and into a treatment center. And he stayed clean. And then he moved. And he said, I need you to come visit. So my husband and I went and visited him. So over a few months, he was staying sober. And that's what he said. You come visit me, I'll stay sober. So we ended up actually moving because we were coming up to where he was living and we fell in love with the area. So we moved to mid-state. We were in the southern part of the state. And unfortunately, Danny's drinking continued and sadly he passed away. But there was so many horror stories about his drinking. Oh, you remember when this and this and that and this. Oh, I remember that time. It was never anything good. So I decided I was going to write about the good stuff. And if you read about Danny, Danny loved his guitars. He loved music. He was a nature fan and he loved nature. He wanted to be outdoors. He painted, he drew. Um, he could be the sweetest person. And that's what I wrote about. I wrote about all the good that I knew about Danny. And I wanted it in the book because I wanted Danny remembered for the goodness in his heart and who I knew, even though I had my issues with him and I had some negative experiences with him. The positive ones far outweighed that. And that's what I decided that when these guys go and I find it in my heart to write about them, I want to write about the good they had left behind. And many of them have children. Someday their children will be able to read that and see somebody loved my dad.
Hmm.
I heard these stories, but this person loved my dad and they saw who my dad really was. So that's pretty
Yes.
much what the book is.
I love it. Can I want to read a part of this book and then I want to kind of salute you as well and acknowledge what you just said as far as the perspectives we have on people as human beings, right?
Okay.
But I think you're talking about Danny in this section. I'm pretty sure you are. It was you wrote the title's Isolation. It was March 31st, 2020. So this is peak pandemic, right? I think we're all probably sitting at home thinking, oh, it's just 2 weeks, right? So that's where we are. And you're talking about just the isolation for prisoners and like these non-contact visits. And you
That's
say
scary.
that's scary. Okay.
Scary. Yep.
He said you said the young man I was visiting was not how I remembered him. He looked worn, tired, and depleted. He was in an orange jumpsuit and he had shackles on. He did a good job trying to conceal them from me. I knew from the look in his eyes the recognition of emotions I was going through. This was a person in front of me. I cannot fathom if it were my son. You go on and say, he spoke quietly with tears in his eyes, thanking me for coming. He reassured me he was all right, but I knew better. So this was during a time of isolation, all right, across the country, and let alone people in incarceration. And it was in the news, like advocates were speaking out for like fair treatment, right, and people getting sick and the deaths that were occurring. So there was noise around it. From what you wrote there, what did you witness as far as how people and like incarcerated peoples and persons handled that already being in such a bleak situation themselves?
So I wrote that during COVID, but that was actually before COVID.
Okay.
So um, when I was talking about the isolation, that's when they were still using segregation quite a bit. And when I say quite a bit, you would go to segregate, say, for 3 months, 6 months, a year. I mean, other facilities out of Maine, they could be there for 10 years. And you're talking in a cell by yourself, 23 hours a day.
Is that the same? It's that's solitary confinement, right? Segregation.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Oh, I did
They
not know
call it
that
the
was a term.
SHU, special housing unit, they call it the SHU, or SEG, you know.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I don't even remember what he was down there for, but he had lost about 15 or 20 pounds, and I barely recognized him, and that was the first visit I did with somebody in isolation, and it was just. But COVID, I did have somebody that I cared about that was in jail during COVID. And of course, there was no visits. So the whole time COVID happened, there was no visits. And when anyone got sick, they had to do complete quarantine. So they'd be stuck in their rooms, their cells. And of course, that meant bag lunches, bag lunches, bag lunches. And prison food's pretty yucky. I mean, I've had the experience to eat it
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
few times, and yeah, it's gotten a lot better because we're doing community gardens in our prisons, and people are growing fresh fruits and vegetables and getting healthy foods. But I mean, a lot of the places, I think it's like $1.78 a meal. So what can you do for that?
Right? The idea of having to get some sort of funding one way or another, and they don't care to pay for extra things inside the prison, it falls in that category. Like, let me find a reasoning behind this. Nope, it's not there. Not only are you stuck here and you're less than a human being, but we'd also like you to invest in this system by having to pay for nutrition or showering or commissaries. Like,
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, though. When you look at commissary and those situations, come on, a TV, they charge like $250 for a TV that costs probably $75. Everything is marked up so bad. And there was a time when you would put money on books. Do you know what that is? So they have an account that you can deposit money into so that they can make phone calls and get their commissary items. There was a time that if they owed restitution, so if they had a fine that they had to pay, or they had child support they had to pay, even though we were a nonprofit sending money in, they took 25% of it. Now, if you can only send somebody $20, $5 of it is gone. And we used to try to do that. Because there was people that had no family, no money, and you get a little bar of soap, like a hotel bar of soap. That's what they give you, or a little tube of toothpaste. It's not like, you have to buy all that stuff. People
yeah.
think, oh, well, they get everything supplied. No, they don't. Everything they get, they purchase. They've even done away with free stamps now. You have to, really be desperate to get a stamp.
And that's a huge line of communication, as for it is for you, for
Yeah.
people to write.
Well, and that's the thing that's great about the tablets, because the tablets you can text message. So once you establish the account, you can text, and it's so much cheaper. One facility is only 20 cents for 1,500 characters. And the other one is 25 cents. So it's cheaper than a stamp.
I get your point, and I 100%, I'm nodding in yes, but there's a voice in my back that has they're paying per character? Like, they're paying for text characters. They're be paying for the
They pay
oxygen
for
they
the
are breathing in
tablet.
their rooms.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It is also a reflection, and this is why your point about getting in people's pockets is unfortunately so clever, because they're taking advantage of every little piece and scrap and corner that they can to make money off an already really crappy situation. So that's why I agree with you. The best way to counter that action is with the same action, right? Like, let's financially get into people's pockets and change their minds that way. Let's convince people that somebody else is being reckless with their money, and also, by the way, destroying people's lives. Whether you agree or not, it is not anyone's job to pass judgment unless you're on a jury, maybe. You do not get to give a good or bad judgment on somebody else. But you got in trouble too. You just didn't get caught, right?
Exactly.
Do not. And then on top of that, we're going to allow our leaders and other people, that are official and supposed to be knowledgeable to then make money off of that situation. No, absolutely not. Nope. I'm down to fight that system if you are.
Yeah. Well, if you think of the cost of a community college is around $10,000 a year, wouldn't it make way more sense to pay for community college than prison?
That's too reasonable.
Especially like first-time offenders, if they said, oh, well, listen, if you'll agree to go to school, and if you agree to do this, we'll pay for you to go to college instead of you going to prison for a year. We'll pay for you to go to 4 years. They could go for what it costs for 1 year in prison.
Yep.
But that's giving them something for nothing, right?
Oh, God forbid. No,
Yeah.
no. That's crazy. Crazy talk. You said something about I find so important, and also our biggest challenge, but also our responsibility as human service professionals, and that's changing perspective. No, scratch that. It's not changing perspective. I don't believe we have the power to change each other's minds, but we do have to create this space wherein that option is presented, right? So through education and experience, And it's not just us on the outside. It's also providing people that are incarcerated the resources and the space to realize that if they want to, they can shift their perspectives of their situation. There's a lot that we have to change our minds about when it comes to our perspectives of what punitive justice is and what incarceration looks like and the type of people that get in trouble. I think that is a huge part of what your podcast is doing through storytelling, because that's secondhand experience. But I mean, would you agree, like, perspective change is the underlining main priority in order to help people, even just help people at the least serve their time appropriately?
Definitely a change of perspective is needed. And I think part of that is the people that are affected, people that have done the time should be coming in and talking in groups like this. They should be invited to the table. They should be part of the solution. They were there. They're the ones that need to educate us. And that's where I've been finding it so important to try to interview people that are still in prison, because then people say, wow, I can't believe I just heard this remarkable conversation from this guy and he's doing 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
So they see that humanness. That's what I think changes the perspective. And we always say, oh, well, these guys in prison, they come out and they do all this bad. There's a lot of people coming home that are doing good. I mean, there are a lot. There's professors out there, and that are teaching, and there's people working with the criminal justice system that were
Mm-hmm.
system impacted.
Yeah, that's always the best. I love seeing not even just in incarceration experiences in that realm, but people that come out of a challenge or something like that. I saw a lot of professionals in human services come to their jobs too. Like they had an experience, they're like, not about that, no way. And then they get into some sort of work that counteracts the experience they had because they don't want other people experiencing it. That is beautiful. That is firsthand eyewitness account. Like, I want to hear from you because I'd like to see someone sit there and say, no, I can't believe you. I don't think you were in prison. Leave the table. Leave the table. You don't know what you're talking about. And unless you want to go to prison with me, we could go together and stay the night and see. Do not dismiss people who have that experience, right?
I do want to make mention that there is a really good resource for anyone wanting to learn more about prisons. The Marshall Project does a series on YouTube, and they have a new series out called Vice. And that is really going to be a powerful series.
All right, I'm gonna make sure that I have that available for people in the link. We're gonna stop there, and I have to. We have to because we're already over an hour. But this will definitely end up being a two-parter. Valerie, thank you so much for the work that you do, for getting me all excited about this topic, and for just giving some good essential insight on what's really happening. There's a lot of noise, and the noise always sounds like it's bad. We never hear anything good, but you've made it a point today to really highlight the goodness that is, like, the potential for it, and that it already exists. So I appreciate that a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me.